Today we're going to look at keyboard input using a scanner. So where do we start? Well, first off, we're going to need a couple of things, an import statement and a scanner. So here's some code that uses a scanner. And we see that we have an import statement, import space java.util.*. We'll come back to that in a second. But in the main method, we have a scanner object. We have to declare a scanner variable. So scanner console, console is the name of our variable, equals new scanner parentheses system.in. This creates a scanner and allows us to read the input that the computer receives from the keyboard. The import statement, import space java.util.*, that statement is needed to tell the Java compiler where to find the functions associated with the scanner class. The statement scanner console equals new scanner system.in, this line is the declaration of the scanner, and it also creates the scanner object. Just like regular variables, you will need to declare it only once, and after it's declared, you can refer to it by its name as often as required. Writing programs that are interactive is more interesting. A program that only uses hard-coded data can still be useful, but it makes the program a little less user-friendly. Programs that can perform some operation, no matter what the input may be, are more useful, especially if you're writing the program for someone else who is not as savvy with programming as you are. You must prompt the user first. When you ask for keyboard input, you should always first prompt the user with system.out.print or system.out.println statements prior to getting the input. If you don't prompt first, then the console window may not pop up and your program will appear to be non-responsive. Below is a video of the console after the code in the previous example has run. Note the blinking cursor. This means that BlueJ is waiting for the user input. So here's a prompt. Enter your name, and then the person types in Mr. Bunn, and then hits return, and the computer program responds. Getting different types of values. We may want to get integers or doubles or strings or maybe even booleans later. And this is the code that you'll need to do that. If you want an integer, let's say we're prompting for the number of hamburgers that somebody is possibly going to request. We would want to create a variable for storing hamburgers. So int hamburgers equals. Remember that console is the name of our scanner, so we would say console dot and then a method. In this case, since we're looking for integers, we're going to ask the scanner to read the next int. This will read an integer number that's typed in at the keyboard and store that value in hamburgers. Likewise, double tuna equals console dot next double will read a number that could fit into a double and return that value to be stored in tuna. Now there are two different methods for capturing strings. For instance, if you're going to ask for a name that's just a single name, like a first name only, we would say console.next. If we wanted more words than just one, we would want to use next line. For instance, string sentence equals console.nextLine, which captures the entire line and not just a single word. If we wanted booleans, for instance, boolean has key, we might ask the console.getNextBoolean. The next int, and next double are ways of getting the next token. So token is one of those words you want to learn, and a token is simply a piece of data returned by the scanner. These methods will allow us to get the next token typed by the user on the console and returning it to your program. Once those values are retrieved, you can store them in your program and operate on that data. Make sure the type of data that you're reading from the user matches the variable that you're trying to store the value into. So here's some helpful vocabulary. A token, a basic unit of what you're scanning, the next thing that is returned by next, or next int, or next double, etc. Tokenize. This means to break up what the user types into tokens, pieces of data, individual data. The word parse might also be used, and it means to divide something into tokens. It can be used similarly to tokenize Generally, it involves a conversion from one data type to another, from a string to an int, for example. Note that the get method takes the next token as a string, and anything can be a string. In this example, we've prompted the user for a real number, and we've captured the data as with next. But remember, next returns a string, and you can't store a string in a double. So this statement would be no good. The compiler will flag this as a compile time error. Even if the user enters a valid double, for instance 56.124, the console.nextLine will return whatever was entered, but as a string, 50 in quotation marks 56.124 quotation marks, causing this program to crash. And actually the program will never run because this is a compile time code and your program just won't compile. Instead, we want to parse what the user enters using next double, which will return what the user entered as a double. So we would have to fix this line of code by replacing the call to next to a call to next double. So there's two different methods that return strings, the next method and the next line method. The next method will get the next string of text until the next white space character. So basically we think of that as like one word. The next line method will get the next line, everything typed on the console within a line until the user hits the enter key. As soon as the user hits the enter key, that actually terminates the end of the particular line that the person is typing on, and it will cause the next line method to retrieve everything on a given line. So it's good to see this in example. If the user typed in hello, how are you, and you called next, it would only capture the word hello because hello is followed by space. Another vocabulary word that you should know is the word delimiter. For the scanner, the delimiter for next is white space. So this is a delimiter, this is a delimiter, this is a delimiter. So when you call next, it reads all of the text up to the delimiter, which is white space, and returns hello. In contrast, the next line method would take the entire line of text on a given line and return that. So it would return hello, how are you? Next line has a different delimiter. So here we have some code, a code sample. So we have a scanner called console. We have a prompt, system.out.print, enter your name. And then we retrieve the name with next line and store it in a variable called name. Then we can print hello name. Again, clear and accurate prompting is essential. For example, if you want the user to enter an integer, but you prompt with enter a number, is the user going to know that it's an integer or a double? If your code expects an integer and the user types a double, then it will crash at runtime. A better prompt would be enter a whole number and no decimal point. Then the user would be sure to enter an integer. So here's a string input example using both two next lines. What we're trying to demonstrate here is that we create one scanner object. The scanner is called console. Then we prompt for a name and store it in name1. Then we say hello to that name. Then we ask for another name. This one is stored in name2. Notice that we're still using the same console. We didn't construct a new console or scanner object in order to call next line twice. Getting the right type. Remember, you can't save a double into an int. The code below would cause a runtime error. For instance, you requested a double value, but then the double value, when you call next double, you attempted to store it in an int. Well, this is a compile time error and this won't compile. However, an int can be stored into a double. 2 is the same or equivalent to 2.0. This would work fine. Generally, you don't want to do this. If you're asking for a double, then you should call next double. And if you're asking for an int, you should call next int and store it in an int. Now let's look at some coding examples in an editor. Here I have a class called Practice, and it has a main method. And we're going to use this class to create a scanner object and capture input from the user. So before I create a scanner object, I have to tell the compiler where to find the scanner class. So import space java.util.scanner. When I write an import statement, notice that it goes before the class declaration, and it uses the keyword import, and then it has the location to find the class scanner. So Java and util are both packages, which are just folders, and the scanner class is located in the util package. You can, instead of explicitly writing the class name, you can use the wildcard asterisk, but I'm just going to use the class name for now. So in the main method, in order to use a scanner, I have to declare a variable to use as my scanner, and then I have to initialize it to a scanner object. So scanner, and I like to call mine scan. In the PowerPoint, you saw that it was called console, and it's really up to you what you name it, and I'm just in the habit of naming mine scan. So we have to call the scanner's constructor. Oops. And that will create a new scanner object, but we have to tell it what it's supposed to be reading from. So we wanted to read from system.in. And system.in will use the input that goes to the system or to the computer. And for us, that's the keyboard. So as the user is typing into the keyboard, then scanner can pick up that stream of keyboard strokes, and we can turn that into data. So I'm going to prompt for a couple of things. So let's start with an integer. I would like to capture an integer that I'll just call num1. And I'm going to capture that using nextInt. But if I run this program, I won't have told the user what they're supposed to do. So here is the console window, and it's actually waiting for me to type in a number, for instance 4. And so now it completed because it captured the 4 here. But I didn't tell it that I didn't tell the user that the user is supposed to type something in. So this is where you write system.out.print, and I do prefer print to print line because I'll be able to type on the same line as the prompt. So enter an integer. And notice how I put a space after the colon, and then we're going to go ahead and print this out. The number is space quotes plus m1. And so when I run this code now, we see that I get a prompt. Well, it helps if I put my semicolons there. Let's try again. And when I run this code, you can see now I have a prompt, enter an integer. And you can see that I have a nice space after the colon, and I'm going to enter the number 45. And when I hit enter, that number is then captured by nextInt and stored in num1. So we can see that my output statement, the number is num1, shows up as the number is 45. So I'm just using that same variable that I used to capture the input. Now you can see my IDE, the console, has the user input put in green. So you can see the distinction between the user input and the input produced by the program. So that's how to capture an integer. Let's quickly do a double. So for convenience, I'm going to copy paste this stuff and then just retool it. So instead of entering an integer, I want to enter a real number, which means that for number 2, I really need to capture this as a double. And I want to make sure that I use the correct method. So I want to use next double. And of course, I need to update my printout. So when I run this now, I'll get a prompt for an integer. That's the first one. I'll type in 8. It says the number is 8. Now it's prompting for a real number, so 3.14159, and I hit enter, and it says the number is 3.14159. So that is how we're able to capture some numbers. Now let's see if we can capture some like a name, a string. I'm going to print this again, but this time I'm going to write enter a name. And for this one, I'm going to store the value in a string, so string name. And it doesn't compile right now because an integer it cannot be stored in a string. So I'm going to switch it to next, which will return a string. And then I'm going to say hello to the name. We run this again. The integer I type in is 4. The real number is 2.75. And the name is Susie. It says hello, Susie. Now, if I wanted to type in more than one name, let's see what happens when we run it. I'm going to type in a first and last name. So we'll type something in just to get past these initial ones. Susie Smith. So when I hit enter, it only captures the first word because remember, next only captures up to the white space. This part right here is white space. That's the delimiter. So it's only going to capture Susie. And in fact, if I wanted to store this as, say, the first name, and then wanted to also collect a second name, so like a last name, we could do that as well. And let's create kind of an all-purpose Mr. Mrs. And then concatenate that with the last name. All right, so let's see what happens when we do it now. So we type in a number 3, the real number's 2.9 or 2.0 is fine, and the name, and here is where we can type in Susie Smith. And now we have the first word has been captured with the first call to next and stored to next line, and the last name has been captured and stored in last name. All right, and let's capture a sentence. So I'm going to use, we'll just type it again. And remember, I do like to use print for the prompts instead of print line. So enter a sentence. So string sentence equals scan dot next. And this is where we want to choose next line. Remember, we want all of the words on one line. And I'm going to actually allow the sentence to print on a second line so that it shows up. All right, so let's run this again. So I'll type in 8 for the number. For real number, I'll type in 2, but do you see how it prints out 2.0 because it's stored as a double? Now we'll say Joseph Adams. It says, hello, Joseph, Mr. Adams. And then it said enter a sentence. And it looks like it messed up. So why did it mess up? Why did it not allow me to type a sentence? Well, the reason is that there is an enter. I pressed enter at the end right here. And so it's a little bit tricky working with next and next line, but I really need to clear off the new line character that occurs after Adams. So right after I call next up here, I'm just going to get to the very end and clear off that new line character that gets inserted into the stream when I hit enter. Now let's run this again. So integer is 2, real number is 1.6, name is Joseph Adams. And it says, hello, Joseph and Mr. Adams, and then we get to write a sentence. This is a program. And now we see that the sentence is printed out. This is a program. So working with next int or next line is a little bit tricky, but realize that its delimiter is not white space like the other ones are. The delimiter looks for the end of line character or a new line character. All right, so I hope this helps you understand what's going on with Scanner and how to use it and how it might be useful for capturing information in your program so that you can process different input values. Good luck.